All right, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Sorry, I'm actually wildly nervous.
Yeah, same.
And really excited to see you in the flesh. The grants materialize as projects, but to see you gathered here really is the core of the work. My name is Lee Rayford.
And I'm Tiana Paschel.
We are professors of African American and African Diaspora Studies, and together we are co-directors and co-principal investigators of the Black Studies Collaboratory here at UC Berkeley. We are, of course, here on the campus of UC Berkeley, sited on the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. One way to make concrete such acknowledgement is through the payment of Shumi land tax, a material way for non-Indigenous people living in the East Bay to participate in the rematriation of land to Indigenous people, and that is something that the Collaboratory is working towards.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say one thing, which is that today, it looks like we've moved one step closer in Oakland to having 5 acres of land rematriated to the Ohlone people. So it can happen, and whatever city government says that it can't, it's not true, it's a lie. The Collaboratory is a recipient of the Andrew W. Mellon's Foundation's Just Futures Grant, an initiative designed to address racial inequality through bold and unique humanities-based research projects. At the Black Studies Collaboratory, we are committed to amplifying the world-building work of Black Studies through programs like our Abolition Democracy Fellows Program, our Global Black Feminism Summer Lab, our Open University course. Let's see. And our Small Grants Program. You can find more information about the Collaboratory at our website at blackstudiescollab.berkeley.edu.
One of the central threads of this work is a recognition that Black study is far from the exclusive domain of the university. Instead, Black study happens everywhere, from the kitchen table to the seminar room, from the street corner to the concert stage, from the archive to the artist studio, from the prison cell to the lecture podium. In that spirit, today we are gathered here for our first ever small grantee symposium. Last year, with the extraordinary help of our advisory board, some of whose members are here, over the spring and summer cycles, we have awarded over $100,000 in small grants to support 27 projects that center Blackness and Black life. Today, and we have 2 more cycles, so please apply, and I'll say more about that again at the end. But today, we will hear from the phenomenal staff, undergraduate and graduate students, and faculty who are the recipients of these small grants. As you will see today, these grantees are doing exciting and creative work. You all are doing exciting and creative work that in many cases lies outside of conventional ideas of fundable research. And I just also want to mention, actually, no, I'll mention that at the end about the videos.
Okay. Rather than do a formal sequential presentations, we've designed the symposium as a set of conversations. We hope that in addition to learning about the amazing work that our small grantees have done, that this symposium will also shine light on the abundance of creativity, interdisciplinarity, and collaboration that we have and have always had in our community.
So on the topic of abundance, we would like to thank all of the people who have made this event possible. First and foremost, Barbara Montano, our project manager extraordinaire. Our graduate student assistants, Alexandra Gassese and Francesca Araujo, who are here both outside. Our undergraduate research assistants, Abby Simmons, Alicia Harger, and Jessica Allen. The Andrew Mellon Foundation, W. Mellon Foundation. Okay, that's fine. We would also like to thank the Berkeley Event Services staff, especially event coordinator Luke Frank, and the Berkeley AV staff here today for their support of this event, which I should mention is being recorded. So just be aware of that, but this is also for our archive, right? We know it's important that we have a record of the work that we've done, that you are doing, and that we're here. And we want to thank Rick and Ann's Catering for breakfast and lunch.
We'd also like to thank the grantees for your work, foundationally for the work that you do, but also for sharing that work today. We also like to thank the moderators, Nadia Ellis, Courtney Morris, Michael J. Myers II, Victoria Grubbs, our seasoned elder in residence, Ms. Daphne Muse, and Nikki Jones for both moderating a panel today and also for her brilliant and thoughtful leadership as the chair of the Department of African American Studies. And last but not least, we would like to thank our ancestors, the ancestors, without whom this would not be possible.
So three notes before we get started today. The first is that applications are now open for our next cycle of small grant awards for UC Berkeley students, faculty, and staff due September 30th. And we strongly encourage you to apply. There is a cap of there's a cap for how much you can receive, but you can all apply again. And we're also especially excited about undergraduates applying.
And staff.
So you can learn more about the application on our website. Most of our grantees in the spring and summer cycle are here today. Some could not join us, and they've sent in videos, which will be playing during the lunch hour. So you can hear more about those projects as well. And then finally, please remember to speak into the mic for recording purposes. And we'd like to now turn it over to the moderator of our first session, advisory board member and professor of English, Dr. Nadia Ellis.
Good morning, everyone. I was only just going to say my name and my affiliations, and they've already been said. And so, hi, my name is Nadia Ellis. I'm a professor in the English department and a proud member of the advisory board. And I would like to welcome the small grantees for the topic of Black space to come forward. It's a really dynamic group of graduate students. Maybe as you're coming forward, I'll say names and you can do a little bit of a gesture so folks know who you are. So please welcome them. Welcome them. Sit anywhere you would like. So excited to be a part of this conversation and also so thrilled by the format that Tiana and Lee have derived and Barbara have derived for today. You know, that we're not going to just be speaking at each other, but with each other. And so, you know, everyone on this panel is doing a really incredible work around space, and there's a lot of resonance amongst the projects, and so you'll have an opportunity to talk with each other. And of course, everyone here gathered, please feel free to ask questions and to make observations as well. So I'll give names, and then I'll invite you in that order to come forward if you'd like, to sort of describe your project a little bit, and I know a few of you have some images or some videos to share as well. Okay, so we have Rashad Timmons, a graduate student in the Department of African American and African Diasporic Studies. We have Juleon Robinson, graduate student in the Department of Geography here at UC Berkeley. Morgan P. Vickers. Also a geography graduate student, we have April Graham Jackson. Hello, hello. PhD candidate in the Department of Geography. And finally, Roderick E. Jackson. I love the flourish. And so thank you for the warm welcome. I will have a seat. And Rashad, if you would like to describe your project to begin.
Testing 1, 2. That's on. Good morning, my folks. Oh my goodness. It feels so good to be here in person and seeing y'all. I'm so excited. This has been a long-awaited day, and I'm really grateful to be talking and thinking with you all today. Yeah. I think I want to start by also honoring and giving grace to my ancestors who are present with me and in the space with all of us, and have been so rich and present as I've been doing and embarking upon my work. It's actually been quite unsettling how present and how present and active they've been as I've been doing the work that I've been doing. It's been a profound gift, and I'm happy to share a bit of that today. I love Black Studies, and it is a dream that I get to do this work every day. I'm so grateful to be doing and thinking rigorously about Black life. The small grant really enabled me to do some crucial methodological work for my dissertation project, which in sum is about how Black folks contest geographies at the site of infrastructure. I think that I'm very excited and think it very important to talk about infrastructure as crucial conveners and organizers of space. And I am excited to rigorously attend to how Black folks enact politics at the site of infrastructure, how they perform wake work at the site of infrastructure, how Black folks understand infrastructure to be at the center of how Blackness is negotiated and enacted and visualized. Those are the broader stakes of the work. This summer, what I spent my time doing was traveling to Ferguson, Missouri, which is what my dissertation focuses on. And I spent some time doing two things. One is archival work about the history of railway infrastructure in the antebellum period. Ferguson is incorporated in 1894 as a railway town. And so I did some archival work to search the history of railway development in the region that becomes Ferguson, Missouri, and how that development intersected with the practice of slavery. The second kind of prong of what I was doing this summer was attending to the geography of transit infrastructure, particularly on the street Canfield Drive, which is where Michael Brown Jr. was tragically murdered by Darren Wilson on August 9th, 2014. And so I got a chance to travel to Ferguson twice. The latter time, I went on August 9th, which was the 8th anniversary of Michael Brown Jr.'s death, and got to be present with the family and spend time with them at the memorial. So as we're talking about Black space today, I really want to hone in on the memorial site, the literal spot where Michael Brown Jr. perished, as such a complex and rich geography that the family animates and commands space around. So I'm trying to do this in a succinct way. What I'll say really briefly is that it's really important in my work to show the ways that the early railway in the history of Ferguson has created the lived geography that folks in Ferguson inhabit today. So I think I'll reserve time to talk about the historical part and about railway infrastructure in the Q&A, and I'll spend most of my time right now talking about Michael Brown Jr., Canfield Drive, and his family members and how they have continued to animate the space where Michael Brown Jr. perished. One of the things that I found most it really defies representation, and I think I've been struggling to like find words to communicate it, but the spot where Michael Brown Jr. was killed is outlined in yellow chalk. It was the site of a community memorial for 2 years after he perished, but then the large community memorial was cleared to repave the spot where Michael Brown died. And so the grant really allowed me to go and spend time there to learn about the struggle between the family and the city of Ferguson over the project of memory and memorializing Michael Brown in the spot where he perished. So one of the things that I was really fascinated by is that since 2015, there's been the installment of 2 permanent memorials on the sidewalks on Canfield Drive. And what I find most interesting is that the family and the community members, despite the fact that those permanent memorials are now there, insist upon shutting down the street every year to gather at the spot where Michael Brown perished. So in my work, I spend a lot of time thinking about what the politics of that are, what it means for a family bearing an unbearable loss to decide at a whim that this street is theirs, and to very adamantly and rigorously defend it. And so at the heart of that is so many important questions about Blackness, about grief, about memory, and I'm really excited to talk more with folks about why it's important that infrastructure is centered in that conversation. How did I do?
That's great. Julian, do you want to go ahead? Is this on? Are you hearing this? Yeah, okay.
Can folks hear me? Yes. Okay. I brought some notes to help me organize my thoughts, so apologies for looking down a little bit. So my research program is sort of about the interminable, what I call the interminable housing crisis in the East Bay. And even just calling it a Black housing crisis is itself an intervention, but I work on the Black housing crisis in the East Bay. And I think a lot about how the housing crisis has been tracked and explained, and how a lot of the archives about this crisis usually consist of city planning commission reports, newspapers controlled by the political machine, like the Oakland Tribune, county, state, and federal legislation, and analyses that are funded by the real estate industry. And I think a lot about how these archives translate a set of sort of hegemonic geographic logics into a form of housing common sense, right? What can and can't be done, what housing can and can't look like. And so this housing common sense sort of unites a nebulous middle class, which at various points has excluded and included fractions of Black folks in the Bay, into sort of it unites those folks with the real estate industry and large landowners into a housing politics that prioritizes property values over housing for all. And so you can sort of track the value of property in relation to Black life and sort of the antagonism between Black futures and stable white futures and capital over the course of the 20th and 21st century in the East Bay. And so looking at that, rather than resolving the housing crisis, this housing policy continually reorganizes the landscape for the benefit of those stable white futures, often at the expense of Black life. And there's this fundamental temporariness of Black housing that you can follow through the Bay. But that's often on the underside of those traditional archives. And so my summer project sought to intervene in sort of those archives in this sort of housing common sense by creating an archive of the Black home. And so throughout the summer, I conduct the Black Home. Sorry. And so I conducted oral histories of housing organizers, including those from the sort of nascent Black Housing Union, which is within the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, which, it should be noted, is the only organization that specifically focuses on displacement of Black folks in the Bay Area, which is interesting given the sort of radical and revolutionary history of Black tenant associations through the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so thinking a little bit about how those fall away, how those are dissolved, and how this Black Housing Union is trying to resuscitate that tradition. As well as this organization, Richmond Land, which is sort of trying to construct a community land trust in Richmond right now, trying to claim a lot of vacant city land to build permanently affordable housing. And even thinking about how home ownership in relation to rental housing is an ongoing contestation in these places where Black folks are fighting for permanence and this right to remain and this right to stay, and what that looks like and how it's articulated through the possibilities that are sort of deemed legitimate by the state, by the city, by the regional government. Anyway, so I spent a lot of time conducting these oral histories with these housing organizers from Oakland, from Berkeley, from Richmond, and thinking about how they articulate a different sort of housing common sense, one that's predicated on the potential for actual stable Black futures that are beyond the regimes of private property and property values that, you know, I sort of argue are white property values, white futures. These oral histories together in this archive tell the varied stories of struggle and survival despite the temporariness that's imposed on Black communities, beginning with sort of temporary war housing in the late 30s and the 40s, through the disinvestment in the 60s and 70s, and then the gentrification that we're seeing in our sort of contemporary moment of mass displacement and relocation. So the funding I received from the Collaboratory allowed me to get these interviews down. Again, these are what would normally be considered sort of like unexceptional Black folks, right? Quote unquote normal Black folks that often don't find their ways into the archive because they're not doing, you know, the spectacular. But for that reason are all the more important because those are the people that actually create the possibility of remaining, of staying, that build this sort of organizing infrastructure that actually persists through time. And through this archive, I hope to create a resource for organizers to sort of situate the ongoing mass displacement event in context, right? It's not just a housing crisis for Black folks that spans 5, 10, 15 years, but it's an 80-year-long crisis. And if we contextualize it that way, it becomes clear how housing policy has not actually sought to resolve this crisis, but to reorganize it in different moments for different reasons, and to bring that to the foreground so that contemporary organizers can actually assert that, well, the mayor, maybe the governor, when they say that, oh, we're really working to resolve the housing crisis, you can poke holes in it or contextualize it and say, you've been saying this actually for an entire century and it hasn't happened yet. What are you really doing? And people have been asking these questions. And so just trying to bring that to the fore through these oral histories that aren't often heard. And so actually considering it a Black housing crisis, as I started off with, and making that central rather than peripheral, rather than, oh, this is an externality of how the housing market works, but actually saying the temporariness of Black folks is embedded within how we understand housing policy, both historically and in our contemporary moment. And putting this central to the conversation about the crisis, I'm hoping that this archive and eventually this resource for organizers and a set of community education workshops that can be used by Richmond Land, that can be used by the Black Housing Union, will provide that crucial context for generating solutions to the housing crisis that sort of exceed the constraints of our dominant political discourse, where it's, oh, we need to include market rate housing in order to build affordable housing, and sort of ask the question, do we really? What has this done? In particular, what has this done for Black folks that are, you know, being displaced from, you know, the flood-prone areas in Richmond to flood-prone areas in Rodeo, and it just continues on and on and on. So how do we actually stop this process by foregrounding the stories of the organizers that have been doing this for 5, 10, 15, sometimes 40, 50 years?
Thank you so much.
Morgan.
I have some slides, so I'm gonna move up to the computer. Google Chrome?
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Hey, y'all. I'm Morgan Vickers. I am a fourth year in geography. So a lot of my work over the past 4 or more years now has sort of been guided by this question of how do we make sense of inundation, how do we make sense of loss, and how do we visually represent that which no longer exists. So for a little bit of context, my work focuses on the Santee Cooper Hydroelectric and Navigation Project, which is a New Deal project built in the 1930s and 40s. It was initially intended to be built for hydroelectric power, navigation from the capital in Columbia, South Carolina, to the coast in Charleston. But in the process, they dispossessed 901 families, so that was approximately between 2,000 and 3,000 people, and 4/5 of that population was Black. And they sort of guided this project with this myth of New Deal progress, but progress in this case necessitated the dispossession of thousands of Black people. And so I've been trying to make sense of, effectively, but also emotionally and physically, this loss. How do you stand in front of a reservoir and envision 900 families' former homes? And so prior to doing my fieldwork, I played around with some visualizations, which is sort of what you see here. This is my undergrad thesis project, part of it. I studied a different reservoir in North Carolina where approximately like 50 families were dispossessed. But one of the things that the funding here has sort of afforded for me was the opportunity, 1, to go and visit my field site, but 2, to affectively experience what it was like to sort of sit with inundation. I told my advisor this story recently, but when I went into the archives, I had a long conversation with the archivist, and I told him I was having a lot of trouble visualizing what 900 family homes looked like, what former mill villages looked like, what former towns looked like. And he was like, well, why don't I bring you out on my boat and we can go and see the towns for themselves. And so this is the town of Ferguson. It was a mill town that employed hundreds of people. On the left-hand side of that little map, you can see the white mill village. Black mill villagers had to live out of town, sort of out of sight and out of mind for the mill employees. But as I was sitting on the lake with this archivist, we started at this former mill building, and then he brought me with a historic map. We navigated 100 feet away, and he was like, I want you to sit with this for a second. Right now we are 11 feet above the reservoir floor, which means we are sitting where the roofs once stood. And I think part of what this funding has sort of afforded me was this, not only the ability to sort of build these visualizations that I've been thinking about for a while, but it afforded me the ability to sit, I keep saying this, but sit with that inundation, to think about what flooding really feels like. It's a material experience. And I think Rashad talked about thinking and living and being in the wake. This is literally the experience of sitting with the wake of this inundation. So part of one of the things that I'm working on now, and this was the project that's sort of outside of my dissertation, but has helped me think about my dissertation a little bit differently, is this 3D rendering of Ferguson, and hopefully I'll expand it to what the towns used to look like before in order to represent the lives of these 901 families differently. But I created these visualizations to help make sense of the scale of the loss. And I'm also working with a few folks to try and make 3D models. The Santee Cooper project and a lot of other development projects used to make these scale models that you could walk through and see what prospective reservoirs would look like, but I'm sort of trying to subvert that and say, what would it look like if we went back in the past and walked through what these towns used to look like, or swim through what these towns used to look like. So yeah, this has been just a really fun exercise for me. It's also afforded me a lot of space to think really critically and sort of allow space for other dimensionality, quite literally, in my dissertation project. So thank you.
April and Roderick, I know that you're doing a shared project, if I understood it. Okay, so I'm not sure how you'd prefer to present. Go ahead.
Testing.
Hello, can y'all hear me? Hey y'all, how y'all doing? Y'all ready to hear some house music? Because that's what y'all about to hear. So just in the interest of time, I won't spend too much time talking actually about our project because we'd rather show you all and we want you to hear and engage. So stomp y'all feet, clap your hands, stand up if you want to get it, because like I said, house music is up next. But basically, just in short, this project actually has been in the works since like, I want to say 2016. So my husband and I are both very proud Black Chicagoans, as some of y'all know. Right, and so this project comes sort of two parts. It comes out of conversations that we were having as Black Chicagoans with other Black Chicagoans, because we all love to talk about Black Chicago. But it also came out of, I took this wonderful class with my mentor, Dr. Kimberly Juanita Brown, and it came out of conversations around this notion of visual ethics. And I had never heard such a rich and fascinating, term. And it came out of conversations around some of the work that she was doing at this sort of comfortability that was coming out of people looking at Black dead bodies and how they were circulating on the internet. And so I really sat with that, and I was so disturbed by it. And when I'm disturbed by things, that's when I tend to gangster lean into them. And so I started thinking about these things in terms of Chicago and thinking about a lot of the images that were coming out, especially, I don't know how many of you have heard of Chirac, but there was so much conversation around that. And, we started having these really interesting conversations about how our city and our people were being depicted and very much misaligned in mass media. And we, when I was doing some of my thesis research on the house community, we were accessing a lot of places that were showing this sort of counter narrative. And so we wanted to really kind of sit with that and think about it. And as the work sort of has evolved, we've kind of in some ways moved towards also thinking about this notion of an archive, specifically thinking about when we were thinking about the visual and sonic dimensions of like visual ethics and how we might be able to sort of push back on that. And then we also started realizing that there were not a lot of actual sonic archives to tell, like, that we could listen and hear what actual Black neighborhoods sound like. Not the music, but the actual sound. So it's a whole lot of stuff going on with this project, y'all, and we're still, so grateful that we have this grant so we can really kind of work through and sit with some of these really, really thick conceptual topics. But I'm gonna stop there because I'll talk for another 20 minutes. But we're gonna just play the video. So yeah, stomp y'all feet, clap y'all hands, have a good time.
Some ideals that are not real. When they try to change you, rename you, call out and pervert you, you tell them with all the conviction in your heart, I am. When they try to claim you, rewrite your history, reimagine, relocate, and re-envision who you are and where you come from. When they endeavor to tell you about you as if you are not you, you tell them with defiance and fury from the bottom of your soul, I am. When they say you look too weird, you're too wild, too unrefined, unworthy of your work. When they try to express that you're too old, too young, not thin, fat, gay, straight, rich, poor, bad, good enough, you respond with righteous indignation. I am. When they dare to try and imply that you ain't the bad motherfucker that you already know that they know you are. Jump back, jump back, jump back, jump back, jump back, and tell them I am. When they tell you that this is just music, you tell them that you're just human, and this right here is freedom. This is culture. This comes from our ancestors.
Sorry, Roderick, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Is this mic? No, this mic. So yeah, as April has stated before, this project had started in 2017, 2016. I was initially trying to capture photographs of Black fathers because there had been so much negative discourse around Black fatherhood and absentee, fathers, things of this nature. And I just felt like I wanted to counter that narrative. And then as time went on, the project developed into different things and different iterations. And through the grant from the Black Studies Collaboratory, we were able to really expand the project and really open it up and kind of move away from initially focusing on the south side of Chicago, because that's the side of the city that unfairly, but that's the side of the city that is overrepresented, right, in terms of Black pathology, especially in the last 6 years or so, right? Since the last presidential administration, there's been a lot of negative discourse about the city. And so we wanted to not counter the narrative, but to thicken the narrative, right? Because those things do exist. The guns, violence, the drugs, gangs, it's all there. But there's so much more. There's so much more there. There's love, there's family, there's community, right? There's just all the things that we showed in the video, and that's what we wanted to represent with our work.
Projects are so inspiring, so extraordinarily rich. I'm already hearing all of these resonances, contestations, antagonisms. I love, though, what seems to be one of the things I'm latching on as I hear all of you speak is this idea of the archive, the counter-archive, and the dimensional archive, right? The archive that has thickness, dimension, sonic properties, unexceptional qualities perhaps, right? And so as we're thinking together about the kinds of resonances around all of these presentations, I wonder if you can begin to reflect together, because it's so unique to be able to sort of share about what a process of research has been like for you. And so I wonder if we can reflect together about whether there have been challenges to the sort of presuppositions that you brought into your projects that came up as you were able to sort of move further into it through this grant, whether new kinds of questions emerged for you that you're still living with, and what you did with the kinds of challenge or question that emerged for you as you sort of faced it. And you can be reflecting on that, and in the meanwhile, the audience can also be thinking about if there are any questions that you might have. We're running up against time, believe it or not. We have about 10 or 15 minutes, and so we'll have an opportunity to speak amongst ourselves, but if you have some questions that are forming as well, begin to think about those. So anyone can start, anything that comes to mind. Thanks.
Hello. I have just a quick answer. It makes me think about some of the conversations I had with Brandy, which seems like years ago, about the challenges with researching home. And I think for me, especially, right, really dealing with this notion of visual ethics and what that means and how I wanted to present my people and my city was really hard because, You know, when we were going around on the south side, west side, there is the east side of Chicago. And, you know, we see it all, and we know it, we recognize it, we identify it. And so there's this really, for me, really difficult choice around which pictures, even with this, like we were like down to the minute deciding which picture to keep in, which one that we felt might have been maybe too intimate, you know, not so much negative, you know, but more so just like maybe too intimate, maybe that should just be meant for Black Chicagoans, and that should be okay for us to have that intimacy with each other. So that's really difficult. And I don't think I was prepared for how hard it would be. You know, I was kind of coming from this place of, well, this is my city. I know it. I can show what I want and all that. And then there became this really, you know, really difficult dilemma to work through. Like the picture at the end with the hands, that's actually me and my grandmother's hands a few months before she passed away. And then the chair, when Kahari says, this comes from our ancestors, that's my grandfather's chair. And he also passed away. And so it was stuff like that of like, you know, I had to ask my family, like, are y'all okay with showing granddaddy's chair? Because we, you know, my grandfather passed away 3 years ago, and that chair is still there. And it will not move, right? So even that we were thinking about like how that takes up this space. And, you know, it's so complex. But those are really hard decisions to make, and thinking about if this were to somehow end up in an archive in Chicago, what would that say that we are not, right? I can tell y'all what these things mean, but that may not necessarily, you know, also be in the archive itself, so.
How to sort of reflect the dimensionality that you can produce in a kind of context like this when you're not there. Yeah. Any other novel questions or challenges?
Yeah, I had two. One is practical and one is, I don't know, affective, I guess. The practical one is, or I don't know, people have worked with organizers before. It's just such slow work, and you can't research on organizer time, and you can't organize on research time. And so, and you know, it's like organizations fall apart, and there are all these like problems within them, and so it's just like having to navigate that and my own desire to, you know, get a project done with like, oh, that's not how this works at all. Like, y'all are gonna fight about this totally unrelated thing for 45 minutes, and like, I gotta sit here and listen. And also, how do I render that as like a part of the work? And so I'm still thinking about that, because I do think that it's important, is that like messiness of it is a part of how the work gets done. And then the affective thing is I'd never really done oral histories like this. And just like hearing, you know, there's the actual like history of the displacement and the relocation and the violence of that, but just how that generates all these other, honestly, like different violences, like stories of domestic violence, like families breaking up and coming back together. And, you know, I do a lot of thinking about political economy, and that's sort of where a lot of my research sits, but hearing these stories and trying to understand how the, you know, like stories of domestic violence or adoption or losing family or gaining family fit within these narratives, and actually thinking about how that is an essential part of this, you know, the Black data, you know, as opposed to this, you know, the City Planning Commission reports where all of those things are culled out. And so just trying to figure out, do I bring this in? It's like so intimate, an oral history, and so how to figure that into a story about like the housing crisis, and sort of thinking about how important it actually is that we think about domestic violence as like an incredibly essential part of what the housing crisis does to Black families and to Black people. And you know, it's hard to listen to those over and over and over again. And so that was a big challenge, I think, because I'm still trying to navigate that.
Can I share really briefly?
Please.
I think testing 1, 2. There we go. I think I also have 2 things to share briefly. Yeah, the first one, I guess I should preface by saying, oh my goodness, thank God for like Black feminist historians. Like, I feel like in the historical chapter on like railway infrastructure and slavery, you know, Saidiya Hartman says, right, like scandal and excess like inundate the archive, right? And like that is literally what it has been. Like there's been so many gaps, so many silences, not only about Black life, but even about the folks who, all of the relations of early Black presence in the region that becomes Ferguson are connected to, like those figures, the slaveholders, like all of these things. And so working within the gaps and the silences has been, yeah, I've like read about it, of course. And I think to like finally like be confronted with it and like have to make sense of it, yeah, it's like made me exponentially more thankful for Black feminist historians and trying to make sense of that work. The second thing I'll say is, I think just personally, when I went to Michael Brown Jr.'s memorial, I was scared that I wouldn't find anything. Because I know that the community memorial had been cleared and that the street had been repaved. And so I knew I'd find the 2 permanent memorials that were on the sidewalk, but I had my own thoughts about that, right? Like Darren Wilson's first command to Michael Brown and Dorian Johnson was get the F on the sidewalk, right? So the fact that the memorials end up there is telling. But when I got there, I did notice that the street, the section of the street where Michael Brown was repaved, Michael Brown Jr.'s memorial was repaved, was outlined in like yellow chalk. It was just so profound to me to see, right, that like, even though like there had been an attempt to repave over this section, right, to clear the section of the street, right, that had been sullied and stained, right, with Michael Brown Jr.'s blood, right, that there was this insistence on maintaining, right, the visibility of this place and this space. And so it got me thinking a lot about the built environment, infrastructure, and how people relate to it as a form of ephemeral archive, right? It's been really crucial to me to be thinking about how to take stock and make sense of history as places change over time. Yeah.
I'm thinking suddenly about the relationship between the ephemeral and the interminable, right? And the way that the ephemeral can work against the interminable. I was also thinking about the interminable, hearing that beat, right? Because the obverse of that kind of interminability of displacement is that the beat doesn't stop, right? Doesn't stop, right? It's a counter. Any other challenges that you want to discuss, or is there any question that anyone wants to pose? Yeah, please.
I think I went into the archives, or into my archival and fieldwork visit, thinking about this phrase of submerged archives. Like, I think I went in anticipating Black absence. And to some extent, that's true. I'm like sort of in a legal battle right now with the Santee Cooper Company there's like no publicly accessible list of the 901 families who are dispossessed. They've done everything in their power to make sure that list is not publicly accessible. And so there's this material submergence happening, and there's also this archival submergence, like this continued submergence nearly a century later of not acknowledging these lives that were dispossessed. But I think something that I was struck by both in the archives and in my field visit was like how present Blackness was. Like even in the documents where they tried to write Black people out of it, they were still there. They were still written about. They were still documented in some way, even if it was a one-line throwaway to say, we are not going to the Black community. Like that is, shows intent enough on the part of the state. And then even when I went to go and visit that island, we docked on the shore, and I walked a few feet and I picked up like a broken piece of a teapot. And I think just like finding these little, like I think you were talking about like the little fragments. I think I was so overwhelmed by inundation that I thought Blackness was going to be written out of the story, but I think it was so apparent the more I read. And I think the last thing I'll say is, as I was on that boat, I was asking all about the logistics of the boat because I'm really obsessed with water. But the archivist whose boat it was telling me about the depth finder, which is how you sort of see where the reservoir floor is or the ocean floor is. And I've been sitting with this concept of depth finder, like depth finding. How do I go past the horizontal and go into the depths? And I think that sat with me for the past couple months, yeah.
All right, questions from the audience, responses. A few minutes left. And while the audience is thinking, we have a couple questions. Okay, yes, please.
I'm Paul Lee. I'm a visiting scholar in the Department of African American Studies. I just wanted to say God bless you all. Wonderful work.
Thank you. There is a question there as well. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Will. I'm a third-year PhD student in geography. I had a question for Morgan, particularly about archives of water and watery archives. So I've been doing a project on the River Congo. And one of the things I've come up against is that the Portuguese in this area, they didn't keep the same records as the British or French or Spanish. And so we don't know much about what happened. And further than that, if we were to go to, say, maritime archaeology, a lot of it's in the fresh water. So the canoes and watery kind of equipment and cultures would have lasted 10 to 15 years at max. So there's no physical traces there. And so I'm wondering, your comment about still finding the fragments of the teapot, what does it mean when there's nothing there? What does it mean when the river or the environment is the only thing that's lasting? Yeah.
Okay. I think I've been sitting with this for a long time. I mean, I think Ferguson, the town that I showed, was really only accessible and like really apparent because it's the only, like if you look across the reservoir, it looks sort of like an ocean. And there's this one, it was formerly a hill. So there's one building sticking out, one little island sticking out. But I think to the point I was saying about like how the mill town was only the home of the white mill employees. And you, like even on the map of 100 years ago, they didn't document where Black people lived. And so I think like this is something that I'm pushing up against. How can I even find what was intentionally hidden or what sort of the geography has, or the ecologies have changed over time? I'm sort of rambling because I don't have a good answer. I think I'm like trying to ask this for myself. I'm sort of leaning into, like lately I've been leaning into the work of like underwater archaeologists, for example, who are doing a really good job of like literally looking at the ocean floor or the reservoir floor in this case. But I think this is where I've sort of turned to the archives, or in some cases I'm leaning more into like Black ecologies these days as I'm looking at the landscape prior to the creation of these reservoirs and what sort of the changing landscape of the rivers, for example, tells us about what life used to look like. I would love to learn along with you what the answer is, though.
You have a quick follow-up? Yes, go ahead.
I'm not sure this is a quick follow-up.
It might have to be,
As
sorry.
So just in terms of that, I'm wondering, it seems like what we're struggling with is the boundaries between a focus on the material culture and a focus on maybe more poetic representations.
Absolutely.
And so I'm wondering with regard to the fragment, if we center the fragment, what does that mean? Whereas if we center the stories that we hear, we center the oral histories, or we center the poetic imagination of what that Black life may have been, I'm wondering where do you see yourself in that spectrum between focusing on the material culture and the poetic, given the watery archives and the limitations you faced?
I don't think it's an either or. I think like I've realized, I mean, even in trying to make those maps, I'm like, this 3D format is also really limiting me. I want to talk about audio and visual. I want to talk about all of these different dimensions that you can't, I hate this word, but you can't capture in like one format. That's why I'm trying to do so many things. And I think that's sort of what this fellowship has sort of afforded me, yeah.
Did you have a response? All right, I think we're gonna close. I have an experiment. You don't have to take it up. But I want to say thank you, first of all, for your projects, for just the beauty of and the richness of the presentations that you've given today, and for sharing your work with us. Thank you all for your attention. Here's my experiment. As we close after this conversation, after you've presented the work and see how you feel about your project after this presentation, is there one word or one phrase that's lingering for you that you might take out of this room and into the work? And I can say, for me, the word is dimension. That's what I'm taking.
Oh, I am not ready to go first. I don't know. Is anyone else ready?
If anyone else or no one, it's fine. Derek, I feel like you have. Yeah? Or Roderick, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Texture. Texture. Definitely.
I think depth.
Okay, we'll stop.